Welcome to Slacker Sports Show.
Good evening, sports fans, and welcome back to another podcast episode of Slacker Sports Show, where we discuss anything and everything you need to know about sports. Let's welcome in the co-host of the podcast, Mark. How are you doing tonight, Mark?
Doing well. It's been a little bit since we've talked to you guys between the holidays and just life getting busy for both of us. It's been a while, but excited to be back and talking about sports. NFL playoffs are gearing up. NCAA Football championships coming up, and the NBA just started, so we got plenty to talk about.
Yeah, so basically what happened was, as you said, life happened, and so we missed a couple weeks, but we're back this week, and it's going to be up a little bit later than normal. And as we are doing this, it is a Friday evening, so some of these things may have changed by the time you listen to this. Some probably have not. But we're going to start off with the NFL and the playoffs. Last time we spoke, we were just talking about who we thought was going to make it in, who we thought might make a run. Now the playoffs have been set, and we know that there's going to be 2 bye games, which go to Kansas City and Green Bay in the first round, and then the rest of them are, I guess, wild card teams, which is kind of different than normal. Usually there's like 2 wild card teams. Now there's like 6 games of wild card teams, so it's a little different than normal, but Saturday's games are the Colts versus the Bills, the Rams versus the Seahawks, and the Buccaneers versus Washington. Out of those games, which one are you most excited to watch or to listen to, Mark?
I'd say the one I think will be the closest would probably be Rams versus Seahawks. I think the Rams might have a little bit of an edge, but I think they're the most evenly matched out of the 3 games on Saturday. As far as who I'm interested in, I think the Colts versus Bills game is one I'm going to keep an eye on. I mean, I've been on the Bills bandwagon all year, and they've shown how good of a team they are. And the Colts are good. I've heard a lot of national analysts talk about they might be the nobody believes in us team that makes a run. And I feel like if they were facing anybody outside of the Bills, they might have a chance, but the Bills have just been kind of one of the more dominant teams in the AFC this year. So I think the Bills will handle that one, but I'm just intrigued to see how they handle the playoff stage. Like I said, Rams versus Seahawks, I think that'll be relatively close. 2 division opponents going against each other, which there's a couple of those this weekend. I think the Rams will squeak that one out, but I think it'll be probably the closest game of all the Saturday games. And then Buccaneers versus Washington, I mean, we've talked about this a couple of times throughout the season, but basically whoever is coming out of the NFC East, we knew they're probably going to get slaughtered in the first round. Just no real good quality teams there. And the Buccaneers, while they may not be as good as a lot of people thought they were going to be, they're still a pretty good team and should handle Washington easily. What do you think of all the Saturday games?
Well, so you're telling me that the Washington football team has no chance of winning this game?
0.1% maybe. But I don't think it's very, very good. Not a very good chance.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with that. I don't know what the odds are, but I'm sure they're really, really high on the Bucs, because this is probably, honestly, after looking at these games, there's 2 games out of this first round that I feel like aren't going to be close games, and one of them is the Bucs versus Washington. But the Bucs have squeaked a few out against the Giants. And so, I mean, who knows at this point what's going to happen? It's playoff football. With COVID and everything, you could see some stars go down or something. You just never know, especially this year. The Rams and Seahawks game, I agree with you. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be a fun game to watch. I actually think the Seahawks will move on instead of the Rams. And then the Bills and Colts, it's kind of, I would say this one would have been closer, but after watching the Colts give up, 25? They're up at 24, I believe, against the Steelers, and they gave it up. So I'm a little weary about that Colts team now. But I mean, they did get up on the Steelers to begin with. So I don't know. I think that game will be a good game, but I have the Bills as well in that one. The Sunday games are going to be the Ravens versus the Titans, the Bears versus the Saints, and then the Browns versus the Steelers. And I talked about the Buccaneers and Washington being a blowout. And my blowout on the Sunday games is probably going to be that Bears and Saints game. But what do you think about those 3 games, and do you think the Bears and Saints are going to be close?
No, I agree with you. I think the Bears and Saints is definitely the mismatch of the week of the Sunday games, and even if Drew Brees is even average, I think he's got enough weapons around him that they should handle the Bears pretty handily. I mean, the Bears offense hasn't done much all year. Their defense is what has kept them in games and has kept them in the playoff run. So I think Drew Brees, even though he's really banged up, if he can even just kind of be a game manager, that should be enough for the Saints to pull that out. Ravens and Titans, I think, will be close. I don't know if I'm super excited for it just because both those teams have been kind of underwhelming to me all year, but I think that could be a close game that could really go either way. I guess the one I'm most excited about out of the Sunday games is the Browns versus the Steelers. And that's just a division matchup, so you got some history there, and Browns being in the playoffs for the first time in forever. Steelers kind of on a downhill slide. I think it may be pretty even, but the Browns are suffering from a COVID outbreak, and I was trying to find a list of who all's out for them with that, but that could definitely affect maybe the balance. But I still think just the intensity between the two teams, just because of being division rivals, will make it a fun, interesting, hard-fought game. And personally, I hope the Browns come out ahead, but I don't know if they'll have enough with all these people out. So we'll see how all these play out. But I think Sunday you should have maybe a little bit more balance between all the teams outside of that Bears-Saints game. What do you think about some of those?
Yeah, the Ravens and Titans game, I think, is going to... I see that game going to like an overtime or something like that. I feel like that game is going to be close the whole time, or maybe the Ravens get out to a big lead and Titans come back, or vice versa, because those teams are very different teams, but very even teams. As in, the Titans are like, you just never know what you're going to get. If you're going to get that smash mouth, run it down your throat until the game's over team, or if they're going to struggle, then, and the Ravens are the same thing. The Ravens at points this season have looked unstoppable, and then they kind of hit that dry spell in the middle of the season, and then they finish the season where they looked unstoppable. So it's going to be interesting to see what two teams show up for them in that game. The Saints game and Bears, it would take a lot for the Bears to pull up any type of upset there. And then the Browns and Steelers one, I'm kind of with you on. I think it's going to be the most exciting game out of the first round, mostly because I think the Browns, like at this point, if I had to guess, I would move the Browns on over the Steelers, because I feel like the Browns have, I don't know, I wouldn't say they've necessarily been consistent, but kind of at the end of the year, we talked about the Steelers having kind of a cupcake schedule, and they had some big opponents coming up, and then they went 1-4 in their last 5 games. So it kind of tells me, like, Steelers aren't really that good. They got this great record, but they haven't been able to beat good teams. And then you see, I don't know if it's week 17 or week 16, but the Browns beat the Steelers. And so it's kind of like, well, these teams are very, very even. And just because the Steelers have like 12 wins and the Browns have lower, I really do give the upper hand to the Browns. And I think the Browns will move on. The Saints will move on. And then the Ravens and Titans, to me, is literally just a coin flip. I can't really pick one way or the other. Whereas like the Saturday games, I could kind of tell you who I thought was going to win. I have legitimately no opinion on if the Ravens or Titans are going to move on. But two teams, again, that will move on till next week is Kansas City and Green Bay. Green Bay, I was surprised. I wouldn't say they came from behind. We knew about them, but I thought Saints for sure were going to be the first round bye in the NFC, and then Green Bay comes and takes that away. And you have to remember the Saints also had Drew Brees out for 3 or 4 weeks. So they had a backup quarterback in, and they were still winning. And this is a really good Saints team, and they're kind of going to have an easy road the first week against the Bears. So it'll be interesting to see. But Green Bay and Kansas City both moving on. And to talk about another playoff, we were talking about the NCAA Football playoff. And if you don't know anything about it, they pick the top 4 teams, which is picked by a committee, and then those 4 teams are put in a bracket. 1 goes against 4 and 3 goes against 2, and then we find out the two winners, and then they both play for the national championship, and that's what we've got between Alabama and Ohio State. Alabama kind of, I would say, cruising to a victory over Notre Dame. I mean, they had it, pretty much the whole game, and then at the end actually made Notre Dame made it look a little bit closer than it actually was. And then the biggest upset, which I just didn't know going into the game, but Ohio State basically crushing Clemson. And I think the big thing for here was when I was looking at this, and I was like, well, because I think the odds were terribly for Ohio State, and I was like, well, they must know what they're doing because they're odds makers, and they must watch Ohio State to know, that Ohio State's not the favorite. And then they come out and they just obliterate Clemson, and I'm just like, hey, what happened? Like, I watched a little bit at the end of the game because I was busy, but like it just out of the blue, like Ohio State just basically pulverized Clemson, which I thought Clemson would have at least a chance to beat Alabama. What did you think about the first round of playoff games?
Yeah, I guess I'm not too surprised by the Alabama-Notre Dame game. I mean, Alabama's consistently one of the most talented programs in the country, and Notre Dame was a debatable number 4 seed, so that didn't surprise me as much. I was surprised by the difference between Ohio State and Clemson. I figured that'd be a pretty evenly matched game. I figured it'd be like a single score game, like either 3 points or a touchdown, somewhere around there. But I guess I just have mixed feelings about the whole playoff, and it's nobody's fault. I mean, COVID made this season topsy-turvy, and Ohio State only had the chance to get 6 games in before their first round of the football playoff. And I mean, I think Ohio State may have been one of those teams that would have made it in anyway, but it's just hard to compare it to, if you kind of look at the standings or the rankings. Ohio State's was ranked number 3 going into college football playoff, and you got a whole host of teams beneath them that could have an argument to say we played more games, we played more quality opponents. Ohio State only went 6-0, and I like Ohio State. I mean, they're probably second or third favorite team to pay attention to in college football, but it's just hard to come to terms with them getting in with only 6 wins. But I'm not saying they're not talented. I mean, I think they're up there with the Alabamas and the Clemsons, and I mean, you saw that on the field against Clemson. But just a weird year, and I know there's going to be a ton of complaining and a ton of talk on Twitter about if Ohio State even belongs, and if Alabama blows them out, I mean, there's going to be even more of that, saying this team only played 6 games, they weren't ready. Maybe Clemson wasn't as good as we thought. So I think Alabama will probably be able to pull it out. I think Ohio State may be able to give them a fight and put up some points. But it's going to be weird to look back and say 2 to 5 years and look at the college football champion from 2021 and say, were they deserving, or kind of how did they get there, and the weird journey that everybody had to take. What do you think about this game and just the situation that led up to all this?
Well, I think they did the best they could with what they had. I didn't agree early on in the season with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 kind of opting out and then coming back in. I felt like if they opt out, they're out. They shouldn't be able to come back in and start playing games and have a chance, because I think Ohio State is a top 3 team for sure. I do think that. But they come in at only playing 5 or 6 games, so they don't really have that opportunity to lose. I mean, they played 5 or 6 games, but they didn't have a full grind of a season. And then that comes to my next point. They're coming in with only 5 or 6 games played, so their bodies aren't tore up like Alabama, that's in the SEC, that has to put everything out on the line every single weekend. Ohio State's only been doing it for 5 weeks, whereas Alabama's been doing it for 12 weeks or whatever. So there's a little bit of discrepancy there. And I saw something on Twitter today that kind of it made me rethink of what I thought about the college playoffs. So Originally, I loved it because I didn't think that you could pick the best two teams to go to a national championship, because sometimes it's like, well, the team that got in second didn't play anybody, but because they went undefeated, they got in, whereas the number 3 or 4 team could probably beat them, but they didn't get in. So I was happy that they made it for teams that got in. Now, do I think there should be more? I really do. I think they should do 8 and then cut one or two of the, I guess, exhibition games that Alabama has when they play FCS schools that nobody's ever heard of. Maybe cut those back and then add more into the playoffs. But the thing I heard on Twitter today that really made me rethink everything is the college playoff is ruining college football in the sense that Alabama or these teams that constantly get in the playoffs, they're going to constantly get the best players. Not necessarily because a player wants to go to an Alabama or they want to get an education. They're going to go to these schools because these schools are constantly in the playoffs, which gives them more like for the draft and everything. Like they're getting, it's kind of like, would you rather go to a Division II school where you tear it up but you never get seen, or would you rather go to a D1 school that wins a lot and you kind of just get carried along with it and your name's in there? And so these teams that are constantly there, they're going to constantly always be there because they're going to get the best of the best because they're in the spotlight all the time. And that's something that I don't necessarily agree with, because I feel like it does. It really hurts college football, and the reason that like if you think of college football, you don't think of like, oh my gosh, look at all these big upsets. Like upsets really don't happen. I mean, every once in a while you have like an Appalachian State beating someone, but you think of the NCAA basketball tournament that everyone freaks out every year because you got this no-name school that's a 15 seed beating a Duke. And it happens every year, and it gets people so excited. But that never happens in football because great players, no offense, but great players don't go to teams like Utah State or, you know what I mean? Everyone goes to like the same 5 or 6 colleges, and it's just constantly those colleges being the best, which, I mean, if that's what you want to see, if you want to see powerhouses and stuff like that, then that's fine. But as far as like just the excitement of college football, it really kind of brings it out when every single year Alabama's going 12-0 or 11-1, or, you know what I mean? Like they've been good since I can even remember. Like I don't remember the last time they weren't in a spot to win a national championship. Like I know they didn't a couple years ago when Clemson won it, but like they were in the playoff picture. It's not like Alabama had a 8-5 season or something. But I don't know, it just made me rethink about how we're doing the college playoff and how I think we need to expand it a little bit more and make it so that maybe instead of the same 4 teams or same three teams get in, you know, maybe the same 10 teams get in, which would be better than just 3 in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say for the most part I agree. I mean, I don't think it's ruining the game. I think there's still a lot of excitement, but I think there's room to expand, and I guess if you're only picking 4 teams, it's not much better than the old BCS model where you're only picking 2. I think if you moved it to 8 or 10, you'd have a chance for maybe more of those. I mean, it wouldn't be a huge upset because they're the top 10 teams in the country and have the most talent, but I think you'd have a chance for, say, who's in the rankings right now, like Texas A&M, they're about number 5. You may have a chance for them to upset a number 3 team or something like that, and it'll lead to more, I mean, I would assume, it'll lead to more revenue for college football playoff and to kind of spread around. And, I mean, it'd be good for coaches. You could say our team has made the playoff, even if you're not a Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame. If you can sneak in one year, that'd be good for your recruiting resume. And I agree with you, and I saw something similar on Twitter that it's like these same basically 4 teams might be able to switch in a team here and there, but the Alabamas, Ohio States, Clemson's been basically the same ones getting in since the college football playoff has started. It's kind of just a rotation every year. I mean, they keep getting the best players because they're in the championship conversation, and I think if you opened it up to 8 teams, 10 teams, 16 teams, you'd have more teams in the championship conversation, and that might be able to spread the talent out a little bit more. You might see people say, oh, Oregon made it this year in the college football playoff as an 8 seed. They have a chance to be top 10 team in the country. I think the limiting it to 4 teams kind of makes the teams that don't get to 4 or above look lesser than, and I mean, recruits pay attention to that stuff, and they may say, I don't want to go to a team who hasn't been in the playoff since it started. I want to be one of these 4 powerhouse teams. So I would say I agree, and I would like to see expansion. I mean, it's more football for us, so that's nothing to really complain about. And I just think it's better than the model we used to have, but it has room to develop and get better.
Yeah, and so to kind of like bring up what like I was saying about recruiting, in the 2021 recruiting class, which is the recruiting class coming in now after the championship game. Guess who's first? Alabama. Guess who's second? Ohio State. Third is Georgia, which is another like. But that's what I'm saying. Like, well, a team like Georgia could be in that top 8, and then number 4 is Clemson. So you have Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson, top 4 teams, and though 3 of those 4 teams are in the playoffs, and it's like that every year. And you're never gonna get like the evenness. I mean, every once in a while, yeah, you'll get like Oklahoma will go crazy with a really good quarterback, but like I feel like it really kind of stunts the game. And I know football is not basketball. Like I know basketball, a team could get a crazy shooting night and beat anybody, whereas in football that doesn't really happen. But I don't know. I just want to see more teams in it rather than Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State every year. All right, so moving on to the NBA. The season has begun. I think the last time when we talked about it, they were just doing scrimmages and exhibition games, but the season has started, and you're more the NBA person, so I'll let you talk more about it than I do. But is there any surprises that you have so far going into the season?
I mean, I think looking at the standings now, there's definitely some teams that are in the top 8 in each conference that I don't expect to be there later on. I think some of the teams that made a playoff push last year are still they may be approaching the beginning of the season like a preseason or kind of like extended off season. They may not be giving their best right away and saving their energy for the halfway point of the season or just enough to kind of make a push for the playoffs. So just looking at the standings, Orlando Magic, that's kind of a surprise. They're 6-2. I mean, they're a pretty consistent playoff team now, but they're usually a 7, 8, or 8 seed. So to see them up that high is surprising. The Knicks at 5-3, that's definitely a surprise. And I think they have a negative point differential, so that's interesting. There's a couple of teams in the top 8 in the Eastern Conference that have negative point differentials, but Knicks you'll probably see drop. Milwaukee Bucks, they're only at 6th place. They're kind of the favorite in the East, and I mean they got a good point differential, and they're one of those teams. I think more and more games get going, they'll move up. Cleveland Cavaliers, I'd say a lot of people think they're one of the worst teams in the league. It's at 5-4. They again have a negative point differential, so surprising to see them. Raptors, that's a surprise at 1-6, but I think that's one of those teams that will get it going before too long and will make a run. I don't expect them to be down in the dumps that low. Miami Heat are kind of in the same bag there with a 3-4 record in the East. On the West, Phoenix Suns at 6-2. I mean, I think a lot of people thought they were going to be better. They were borderline playoff team last year and got Chris Paul in the offseason, and I mean, I think they're going to be in the playoffs when when the season wraps up, but I don't think they're going to be number 1 seed like they are now. So they're a little bit higher than I think they'll end up. Sacramento Kings at the 8th seed, that's surprising. I mean, they go on kind of runs of acquiring talent. People think they may be a fringe playoff team, but I don't think they're there right now. Memphis Grizzlies, they're at 2-6, but Ja Morant got a pretty nasty ankle sprain a couple weeks ago, and that might be why they're at the bottom of the standings. Houston Rockets are just a bunch of drama there, and that's kind of, I think, what leads their 2-4 record. And the Nuggets at 3-5, another kind of shocker as far as their record, but I think it's mostly a case of these teams have only played 8 to 10 games, and you'll see the cream of the crop rise up this year and probably be what most people expect by the All-Star break or 3/4 of the way through the season. What do you see as surprises when looking at the standings?
Well, I think the biggest one was the Raptors. They're 1-6 last year. They were kind of one of those teams that we're talking about that could make a dent into the playoffs. And so seeing them at 1-6, it kind of makes me ask the question, are playoffs teams going to get off to worse starts because they didn't have as long to recoup? You look at the Lakers, and the Lakers are still winning, but they're not winning like they were last year. So are they still tired? Do they kind of, they only got 30 or 40 days of a break. So these playoff teams, I feel like, are at a disadvantage for being in the playoffs last year, because now the other teams, especially some of the teams like a Memphis Grizzlies or something, that weren't even probably playing that hard anyways when they came into the bubble because they had no chance. Those teams have had like a normal break, a 60, 70, or even longer day break, so they've been able to recoup their bodies, whereas there's the Lakers and these teams that made deep runs, they didn't have a chance to fully recoup because, let's be honest, they took off probably maybe a couple days, a week, and then they got back into training again. Usually you get like maybe a month or two off, and then you start getting back in the training, but yeah, I don't know. What do you see that from the playoff teams?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see Miami, who most people still think is one of the better teams in the East. They're at 3-4, so I think some of these playoff teams are, like I said, resting up and maybe treating this like preseason, trying to get back in shape and get a little bit of rest here and there. And we'll start turning the corner here for a little bit. And then on the flip side, I think some of these, for lack of a better word, bad teams have had this long rest and maybe taking advantage of these tired playoff teams and have got off to a good start, but will kind of fade as the season goes on. So that's why I think you'll probably see the teams most people expect to be there by the end of the season. I don't think there's going to be that much of a hangover by the end of the season that you'll see a team like Toronto or Miami be out of the playoffs. I think they'll work their way up.
So if you had to pick a favorite so far into the season, whether it be a team that's winning or losing or just hasn't really done anything yet, who are your favorites out of both conferences, and then who do you actually have as winning the NBA title this year?
I'd say my favorite out of the East right now is the Bucks. Like I said, they're in the 6th seed right now, but they have the highest point differential, I think, in the NBA right now with 13.7 points. So when they're winning, they're blowing out teams. I think they're just, again, one of those teams that made a playoff run and could be kind of just feeling things out. And they do have, they brought in Drew Holiday this offseason. That was a big trade and trying to make Giannis happy. So they may be kind of putting these new pieces in, and that might be the reason for the slow start. But I think the Bucks are up there. In the West, I think the Lakers are the favorite until somebody can knock them off in the conference finals. They're a 3rd seed right now, but they have the highest point differential in the Western Conference at 7.9 points, narrowly edging out the Phoenix Suns with 7.4. And, I think just the Lakers didn't really lose anybody of consequence, and the guys they were able to pick up are good quality guys. Getting Montrezl Harrell from the Clippers, that's a good move on a couple of fronts, getting a good bench guy to come in and play some center minutes for you, and then stealing somebody from your rival in your own city is just a kind of a power move. Picking up Dennis Schroeder from the Thunder, that was a good move. Another guy who could be a good 6th man come in and give LeBron James and Anthony Davis some rest here and there. So I think they have a deeper team this year, which is scary because they pretty well dominated most of last year. So I think they're my favorite until somebody knocks them off. But they might be one of those teams who kind of coast through the regular season and only gets about 50 wins or something like that, 50, 60 wins, and maybe seeded a little bit lower than most people think, but will turn it on when the playoffs come around. Who do you see as favorites at this point in the season?
I would have. Obviously, I think the Lakers are going to end up winning it again, just because. They're just. I don't know. They're good. They got players everywhere. It seems like, and it's so hard to. You look at LeBron. He's scoring like 22 points, 26 points, and they're still winning. So it's not like he has to turn it on to have them win. So I think later in the season, when it's the playoff time, he's going to be more rested. He's going to be ready to take over games and have to score 40 or 50 points. And I think Davis is just another he's not LeBron, but if LeBron has a bad game before, like when he used to play for Cleveland, if he had a bad game, they're not winning. Whereas I feel like he can have a bad game, but Anthony Davis can pick up the slack, and they could still win some pretty close games against good teams, just because they have, I guess, too many stars. What do you think about Golden State? I know Curry coming back, he seems to be playing really, really well, but then you got the Clay injury, which really, really stinks for them, because I know a lot of people had like them coming back and being able to contend, or at least be a contender in the playoffs. Do you think that team, do you think the Golden State kind of dream is gone, or do you think that, if they had Clay, they would still be all right? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think they're probably about where they're going to be when the season ends. They're kind of on the bubble, one of those last few playoff teams in the West, and I think this year it's just going to be Steph. I mean, as far as he can carry them is where they're going to go. I think you call it the Golden State dream. I think when Clay's there, that's still possible, but they just need to make some moves kind of around those guys. And I mean, this year's not going to be a year you throw away if you can make the playoffs, but it's maybe not a championship year, and I think they probably know that without Clay. But they have some moves they could make. I mean, they got Andrew Wiggins. A lot of people think they're going to trade him at some point. He's just got a big contract and maybe not worth exactly what he's getting paid. And I think when they picked him up, he's kind of seen as a trade piece. James Wiseman is a good young player. Got him in the draft this year. He's averaging 11 points as a rookie, so that's not bad. 6 rebounds, about a block and a half. So he's doing pretty well. Kelly Oubre is another kind of Andrew Wiggins type guy where, didn't do that on purpose, but just they're both kind of good guys, but not maybe somebody who's going to put you over the top. And they're both got pretty decent sized contracts. So whichever way you're looking at it, whether it's production or money, I think they'll probably move on and try to make moves there. But they may wait and do that next year when they know they have Clay back, and they kind of know what they're getting out of him. But what do you think about Golden State and where they're at this season?
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of Golden State. I mean, like, Curry's just unstoppable. Clay can have his games where he's unstoppable. I mean, it was kind of like, like Alabama is in NCAA football. It's like, well, can any team beat this team? And now there's like teams that can beat them, but now they're not 100%. So it's kind of like I wanted to really see that really good Golden State team go up against the really, really good Laker team now. And so it doesn't look like it's really going to happen. And I wonder, Clay's been injured several times, and Curry is starting to kind of get injured more, and it's kind of like, well, is that Golden State thing done now? Because, I mean, I don't know. I just wish they would have kind of been simultaneously good at the same time, because I felt like when Golden State was doing their championship thing, there was really no other team that could fully contend with them, and I kind of feel the same way now with the Lakers. I feel like there's really nobody yet that has shown it that can contend with the Lakers like day in and day out. So it kind of stinks, but I'm hoping that they make some sort of like good season out of Clay getting injured. The last thing we're going to talk about is going to be the MLB, and we were talking a little bit about the money in the NBA. It's the same thing here. Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco getting traded to the Mets. It happened a couple days ago, and everyone in the MLB landscape is kind of trying to fully grasp this, because it is a huge deal sending a I don't know if he's Hall of Fame type caliber yet, but Lindor is one of the best shortstops in the game currently, and you're seeing Carlos Carrasco, another really good pitcher, for basically a bunch of prospects. I've been asked on my stream and stuff about this, and the only thing I can really see that makes sense is Lindor is going to get paid like $20 million this year, and I think $20-some million next year. And Cleveland would rather just say, hey, we're not making another run right now. You got the White Sox in that division that are playing really, really well. So we're not going to make a run for it, so let's just kind of get some younger guys, younger prospects that seem like they're going to turn out to be something good and not eat the $20 million contract. I don't remember what Carrasco's contract is, but that's really the only thing I could say that would make sense, because they traded Francisco Lindor, Carlos Carrasco for Ahmed Rosario. I think he's like 25, shortstop. And then they traded for the 22-year-old shortstop, Andres Gimenez. And then they ended up getting Josh Wolf, which currently on their big board of prospects, he's 12th on Cleveland. And then they got Isaiah Greene, an outfielder who's number 16 now. So they actually did get, as prospect-wise, they got a pretty good chunk of prospects for what they're giving up for Lindor. I mean, obviously, you would, as a Cleveland fan, you would want better, but I really think they're like, well, we're not going to do it this year. We don't want to eat the $20 million contract of Lindor. And if you're the Mets, I feel like you're happy with this trade, and I know a lot of Mets fans are really happy with this trade, and it kind of makes me wonder if the Mets are going to try to make a push. Last year, everyone was like, oh, this Mets team is really good, and they never really showed it. So I wonder if, they're going to try to give it one last shot and see if the Mets can make the playoffs. Do you have any thoughts about this or any MLB news?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as deep into baseball as you are, but just kind of some initial impressions. I think I agree with you. It's mostly about cutting money for the Indians. They're one of those kind of mid-market teams like the Royals or maybe a Detroit, where you can only afford your stars for so long. And this article I'm looking at says that between trading, Lindor and Carrasco, the Indians got rid of about $30 million. So Carrasco must have been making about $9 million a year. But it's kind of one of those sad realities of baseball where these rich teams are going to kind of poach guys when they can afford to, and the mid to lower market teams are going to have to get rid of them basically at some point when they can't afford them anymore, which kind of stinks. But looks like Lindor will be eligible for free agency after the 2021 season. So after this next year, he'll be eligible. So be interesting to see if he sticks around after that. And I agree with you. I think the Mets are probably not done making moves. They do have a new owner who just bought the team in November, and I think he's trying to make a splash by getting some big name guys and maybe trying to make a push there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they went out and traded for some other people or try to get some more pieces. But yeah, Lindor is one of those guys who's probably top 20 player in the game and can definitely make a difference. So it'll be interesting to see him in that uniform and how he fits in there. And it's just kind of sad to me to see these mid-market teams get good and then have to dump their players, but just kind of the reality of baseball, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something else I kind of drives me nuts is the NFL does a really good job about salary cap and not allowing teams to basically, if you're rich, you can buy everything. Because I feel like let's be honest, that's how the world works. If you're rich, you can buy stuff, and that just makes you better and better and better. And that's why usually people that are rich invest and they just become richer and richer. Kind of like the same thing about like Alabama. I mean, they're so good that they just keep getting better and better and better. And that's the sad reality, as you said, of MLB. And it really is, because there's so many teams that have great runs. And you look at the Royals. I mean, if the Royals would have not won that last year where they won it all, if they wouldn't have won, they would have had to still dump Hosmer and Moose. They would have had to get rid of them all. They just couldn't afford it. And yeah, and it just really stinks because, I mean, you think every year you think, oh yeah, the Yankees are always good. Well, they're always good because they buy all the good players, and it's because nobody else can. And so, I mean, I'm not telling the MLB they got to change their stuff because, that's money and all that stuff, but it really does stink that it's not necessarily as fair. But what I do love seeing is when like a team like Tampa Bay or one of these quote-unquote lower teams win it all, because it's so special, because it's like they got there with not the best players. They got there because either their coaching was good or they played out of their minds. But So I mean, it does kind of have its kind of excitingness in the MLB when teams that shouldn't be there make it there. But then you see the teams like, the Yankees, the Astros, the Mets, which before this year, the Mets never really spent a lot of money, even though they had a lot of money. But it seems like their new owner wants to, as you said, make a splash and try to kind of spend more money on this team to make it better. But yeah, it just kind of really stinks that, the MLB is set up this way. And I mean, I'm not 100% sure how the NBA is set up. NBA has a salary cap, right?
Yeah, it's kind of, I've heard people call it like a soft salary cap. So NFL, you're basically, if you hit the salary cap, that's it. Like, you can't spend anymore. NBA is kind of a soft salary cap where they have a salary cap, but you can go over, and then you start paying into the luxury tax, which basically means that you pay I think it's about $1.50 into this luxury tax fund, or I don't know exactly how they have it set up, but for every dollar over you spend, you have to pay another $1.50 into for your luxury tax, and that kind of, in an indirect way, maybe prohibits teams from spending too much. I think if you, in the NBA, if if you're the Lakers or something, or if you know you're going to be making a deep playoff run, you may be willing to go into the luxury tax for that year. But for teams who are the 7 or 8 seed or know they're not going to do good, you don't really want to push close to that salary cap. So it's a little bit different. And the MLB is the most free market, if you want to put it that way, where there's no salary cap. Teams can spend as much or as little as they want, but you just don't ever see teams make their way up from a low market team to a high market team as far as spending and budget and that sort of thing. So, and to kind of add on to what you were saying about the Tampa Bays of the world or the Royals of the world, the reason a lot of those teams are fun is because they have these prospects who they've had forever and these homegrown guys, and then as soon as they get basically too good, or they win the World Series, or they get too good, these teams like the Yankees, the Mets, some of the Los Angeles teams will poach them for a playoff run, and you've watched these guys for 8 to 10 years, and then all of a sudden they're on a new team who's only really wanting to use them for a couple of years to win the playoffs while they can. So just MLB is more free market, and you can see teams spending as much or as little as they want, but it kind of keeps a lot of the lower market teams where they're at as far as spending. Okay, thank you everyone for listening to another podcast episode. We'll try to do this more regularly going forward, and now the holidays are over and we're a little bit back to normal. I appreciate you guys as listeners, and would love for you to subscribe if you haven't yet, and listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple, Spotify, whatever app you use. The platform we use puts them out on all of them. We also started a YouTube channel you can find by searching Slacker Sports Show. We put the audio there. And you can also follow us on Twitter to get updates at Slackers Sports.